think my style is what I would deem as a little bit more constructive. I am focused on what the brutal facts are. Often that requires learning on behalf of the person that's there and a willingness to learn. And I think where I've come up against real tough conversations is to say, look, there is a way to do this that I understand. And I'm not guessing because I've done it a bunch of times. I'm not making this up. And here are the things that you need to learn in order to do this. There are frameworks. I can point you in the right direction. You need to have enough humility to understand that you don't know this stuff. And I can tell you that if you don't learn this and apply this approach, make it your own, but apply this approach, you are going to fail and you will find your way out of this organization.
Welcome back to Tank Talks. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner of Ripple Ventures. And we've got a special episode today with James Baskin, founder and CEO of ZeroStone AI. James is someone who is no stranger to building, scaling, and transforming companies in high-stakes environments. He's a three-time founder with successful exits under his belt and someone who has worn many hats, from chief revenue officer to AI strategist and healthcare innovator. James has helped countless founders overcome stalled growth through his expertise in sales, go-to-market strategies, and OKR building. But most recently, James has held over 300 conversations with top CEOs and cloud leaders and industry experts, uncovering the real pressures of AI-driven growth and efficiency that everyone is hoping to see. Through his firm ZeroStone, he's guiding mid-market companies to unlock true AI value, moving beyond failed pilots to autonomous systems that deliver measurable P&L impact. We'll explore his entrepreneurial journey, personal reflections on leadership, like why an 8 out of 10 is the perfect CEO score, and how he's helping businesses navigate the AI revolution without the risk. Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with James Baskin from ZeroStone. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's Tank Talk, a quick word from our sponsor, Fasken. If you're an early stage founder navigating the legal side of startups, chances are you'll need someone like Will Shaw in your corner. Will is a partner at Fasken, and he is here to help us break down some of the common startup legal questions we get all the time. What other things do you think founders should do to be prepared for the unexpected?
One of the things they can do, especially in the M&A context, hire some good advisors too. Like bring in an M&A advisor, for example, to help you navigate the negotiating the commercial side of the deal or the financial side of the deal. Make sure you've got a good finance team. And if you don't have a super strong finance team who's helped you through acquisitions, work with an outside advisor who can help you on the finance side with getting your financial statements in order. Again, all of this stuff is easier the earlier you bring the advisors in, and they can really help you avoid some unexpected outcomes down the road.
Well, we always refer to your team as like that outsourced in-house counsel for startups. Can you explain what that looks like in practice for someone who's maybe never worked with the Fasken team before?
We think about when you have in-house counsel, you're not concerned about calling them. You're not concerned about, going to them and talking about your risks. And we want to play that role for early stage companies. So we want founders to call us. And that means we need to generate a special kind of relationship where you feel comfortable calling us and we can have those really candid, strategic conversations. And you know that we're going to be there to help assess those risks and to do it in a practical way where we're not worried about boiling the legal ocean. We're worried about how do we make sure the company gets from point A to point B, and what do we really need to do today?
Yeah, Fasken's also super active in the startup scene here in Canada. You're a part of CDL, Techstars, Founder Fuel. Why is that so important to you and the team at Fasken?
It kind of comes back to a core value we have, which is just be helpful. It's been a core value the team's had predating me. It's just something that the firm does too. And I think about if you're part of the technology ecosystem in Canada, you have an obligation to give back. You have an obligation to get involved and support the founders. It's really hard to build a business these days, especially hard to build a business over the last couple of years. We're there because we want to be helpful. We want to educate people. We want to make sure that they're not stepping on legal landmines. I was just doing another presentation this morning. We do lots of presentations, lots of free office hours. We want to be out there and be helpful.
Yeah, you guys have also been a part of so many founder success stories. Before we wrap up, Will, I would love it if you can share maybe one big founder tip for anyone out there who's trying to get their startup to the next level, whether it's the next funding round or the next exit. What are one of the things that you see the best founders do to make those things become a reality?
The best founders that we work with, they just surround themselves with good people. It's good counsel, it's good investors, it's good advisors, it's people who've been there before, they've done it, they have experience, they're practical, and really their interests are aligned and they're all rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, these are awesome insights, Will. Thank you so much to you and the Fasken team for supporting Tank Talks. All right, now let's get into today's episode. All right, thanks for joining us in the tank today, James.
Great to be here, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, super excited to chat with you. You know, we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the last little while, but for some of our listeners who don't know so much about you and your early career highlights, maybe you can give us a sense of where you grew up, you know, what your early childhood was like and your early professional career journey.
Yeah, happy to do that. I was born in the U.S. My parents were kind of hardworking folks, ran a hotel actually in Daytona Beach, of all places, my grandfather owned. We ended up moving to Canada when I was young, raised in Ottawa, kind of played every sport there was. I was, kind of voted biggest gym rat in my high school. Came to U of T. So I was an engineer and played football at U of T. Really kind of amazing experience and set up really the foundation for, I think, how I approached business afterward. I met a lot of my current network. So, Anthony Lacavera and the Global Live crew, kind of got introduced to them and became, good friends with him in that process. Also developed a lot of, first principles thinking, which I think has been core to my career and how I think about my current business and how we interact with, our current customers. And just really a sense of resilience that as a founder, I think is just inherent, just an inherent quality that's, what you need to be successful. Out of school, I started working with Arthur Andersen, who was, still around at the time. And I was, clear after about 5 minutes in that place that I was destined to be a founder and kind of build my own thing. So 6 months into that, I was actually working with Anthony, and within a year, left Arthur Andersen and started our first business. It was a telco business, and cut my teeth as a 24-year-old, trying to figure things out and competing with the major telcos in Canada. Did well with that business, sold it 6 years later to one of the major kind of conferencing providers out of the US, and kind of built a bit of a pattern of, early stage, small amount of investment into kind of telco-ish type customer type businesses with both OneConnect and Pragmatic. Both had, decent exits, returned value to shareholders in all three cases. Anthony and Global Live were shareholders in all three. So, I ended up doing well with them and built a lifelong relationship, both personally and professionally, with that crew. And then, I spent probably 4 or 5 years consulting mostly on go-to-market with early stage tech companies. After Pragmatic, we had a child, my wife and I, and I'd committed to not being a founder, at least for a while. And so spent a lot of time with kind of Series A, Series B founders, helping them on the go-to-market side. And then, that conversation started to turn about 18 months ago, almost exclusively to AI. And so, I've now evolved my consulting business to purely focus on AI, and then added a bunch of additional capabilities that we found were just required in this market around actually building AI-based solutions and helping customers manage AI and agentic AI solutions now with ZeroStone.
It sounds like obviously being in the right place at the right time was obviously a benefit to you, when you got to work with Anthony and the group from Global Live and so on. But a lot of people are in the right place at the right time without even knowing it. And for some of our listeners who maybe are still in university, still building out their early professional networks, what lessons do you have now looking back on those early days of taking a chance, leaving what was an established firm, Arthur Andersen, before its breakdown? And what made you think about taking the risk of only being in a corporate job for a year to go and work for a startup that other people should consider or think about in terms of the processes you went through?
It's interesting. I mean, I felt like I was lucky because I kind of fell into it because Anthony and I were living together at the time. We were roommates at a school, and he'd already started a business. And so, I got an example like firsthand of what that life was like, and all of it resonated fully with me in terms of the autonomy, the ability to solve problems and not be constrained by others. we have similar personalities in that way. I don't think either of us would function very well in something that wasn't ours. I think if there's anyone in university right now that's thinking about it, I would spend time with people that you know and trust that are founders if they're in your network, just to get a sense for what their life is like and what it actually is. Um, it will be the hardest thing you ever do. So you have to know that going in. And I think I got a lot of what that meant in context, just watching Anthony run Canopco and then evolving that into Global Live. And so I was just lucky to witness it firsthand and realize that it was something that I was prepared to sign up for. And I had my eyes wide open, or at least that can be as a 24-year-old kind of going into, a startup.
That's really good advice. I mean, did it get any easier after the, first, second, and then eventually third time being a founder part of that journey?
I don't know if it got any easier other than I did realize, it's funny, I read, after I'd exited all three, I read, what was the book? Crossing Your Everest or Scaling Your Everest. It's been a while since I read that. And in retrospect, I realized how accurately it tracked, all of my progressions in those businesses. Pragmatic was the one that went the longest. It was 13 years. And I really sat in the seat of a CEO of an established business. So I think the pattern that I noticed is it takes about 3 years to get to a business that I felt was at steady state, and you could stop thinking about, trying to keep the plane from hitting the ground and start to focus on really expanding into kind of growing into a market. And what I found in that, the trajectory with Pragmatic specifically, is that I graduated from that early stage of like just basically ignorance, and I think that they were referenced as like delusions of grandeur, into that death zone, I think they call it, where one day you're just all of a sudden the CEO of this business and you have expectations placed on you in the context of a business that's already running. And if you're growing every day, you are running the biggest company you've ever run. And I found that I just landed in a place where I had massive imposter syndrome about a bunch of the things that I was expected to be able to do in the context of a board meeting, financial reporting, a bunch of different things that made it a very kind of lonely experience. And so, kind of advice to people on that one would be an interesting one. I'd have to think about that a little bit more, but the best I got was from Anthony, ironically, which was most people you will find just fall down at some point. And it's the people that can just continue to get up every day that will actually be successful. And the loneliest I think I ever felt, ironically, was in a board meeting with him, where he's like, look, I just don't think you know what you're doing. And at that moment, it was probably the loneliest moment I can remember. And ironically, it's his advice that allowed me to kind of proceed. And kind of how I did that was just to take stock of what do I know to be true right now? What are the actual brutal facts of my business? Where do I want to go? Where are we aligned to go? And then what are the things I need to focus on to actually achieve those things? And when I stepped back from that and took a first principles look at where we are, where we're going, what's needed, it just ended up forming into a list of things that needed to get achieved. I felt like I had control, and that I was able to come back to our board, of which he and I think Bryce Seschap, who you know as well, he introduced us, were part of that discussion. And I was able to align them and myself and our business with what the common goals of the business were and kind of get the thing back on track. I don't think there's anything that ever gets you out of that loneliness as a CEO, but that exercise at least allowed me to keep moving.
That is the most honest, purest answer I've ever heard to what someone could say to terms of like how being in the death zone on Everest is the scariest thing. But having somebody say to you across the table, you don't know what you're doing, is the most eye-opening thing. So, I mean, I can remember that happening in my career as well. And most people would just crumble, right? They would just crawl into a hole and they would just go away and never come back. But as you alluded to, you kind of went back to a first principles basis of dealing with that tough time and thinking about the strategies and ways in which to succeed through that by breaking it down one by one. I mean, the book Scale Your Everest is about how to be resilient as an entrepreneur, with embracing self-doubt, imposter syndrome, loneliness, the psychological challenges of being an entrepreneur, and how to succeed through those sort of death zone moments, which is probably what you felt exactly at that moment in time, right?
Yeah, it is exactly what I felt. And I think what I would say is it never stops. I've set a course for us in ZeroStone that, we really want to make an impact in the world. And we feel like we've leveled the playing field right now with Agentic AI and where AI is and where we sit in terms of our understanding and implementing solutions for customers. And the bigger you aim, the more you end up have the potential to feel that way. And so, there's many days that I wake up and feel that way. And I think having those tools of just breaking things down to where are you, where do you want to go, and how do you get there, just gets your mind, at least for me, in a pattern of thinking of like, okay, well, I can do these things. And it, kind of gets me moving in that direction. But there's no pill that takes that feeling away ever. If you're a founder and you're growing and you're doing new things, by definition, you are going to be in places you've never been before. There's going to be discomfort, and you're going to feel like some days you don't belong there.
Let me ask you this now that you've been a, fractional, mentor, fractional CRO for others and advising them. Have you ever said those words back to somebody else now on the other side of the table? You don't know what you're doing?
That's a good question.
Because it hurts so much probably at the time that you're like, I don't want to invoke that pain on somebody else, but I know what it did for me.
It was particularly interesting because it's someone who's know you so well. So in that particular instance,
it came from a place of caring for sure.
Absolutely came from a place of caring. And I realized that later. I didn't feel like that way at the time. I don't know if I've ever been that blunt. I don't know. Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to be that blunt. And I feel like I'm reasonably courageous person, but I haven't been that straightforward, but I have been. I think my style is what I would deem as a little bit more constructive, but I am focused on what the brutal facts are. And often that requires learning on behalf of the person that's there and a willingness to learn. And I think where I've come up against real tough conversations is to say, there is a way to do this that I understand. And I'm not guessing because I've done it a bunch of times. I'm not making this up. And here are the things that you need to learn in order to do this. There are frameworks. I can point you in the right direction, but you need to have enough humility to understand that you don't know this stuff. And I can tell you that if you don't learn this and apply this approach, make it your own, but apply this approach, you are going to fail and you will find your way out of this organization. That's just how that's going to go. You need to be in a place of trust to be able to deliver that message. And so it always ended up working out. And I've gotten, feedback from some of the more difficult conversations that it's been a helpful thing. Just like that, in hindsight, that conversation with Anthony was helpful for me.
Absolutely. I think for us and the founders that we work with at the earliest stages, we have to be brutally honest, but we have to come from a place of actually understanding what they're dealing with. What we like to say is you have a perception of the way you're viewing this problem. We're going to provide you a different perspective of how it may actually be viewed from somebody else's perception. And so that's what we're trying to do. But in your style, in working with other companies over the last several years, you've done a lot of work around go-to-market, sales, OKRs. Talk to us about some of the most common mistakes you see founders making when setting objectives for their teams, their leadership styles, their personal growth ways in terms of trying to implement their views on other people's objectives.
Interesting. I mean, I'll start with objectives because this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And in hindsight, in my own businesses, I felt like I wouldn't do it the same way that I've now helped others do. And it's to root objectives in where you have long-term sustainable differentiation. And so, I implemented OKRs as a goal setting framework in my businesses, but I never had them really anchored to a strategy. And so it wasn't until I read the book Set and Powers, Hamilton Helmer, that I really understood what moats were and how to think about long-term strategic differentiation. And so ultimately I rooted objectives I developed my own framework, but rooted objectives into driving and reinforcing and growing our long-term capabilities and long-term strategic differentiation over time. In SaaS, a lot of that is switching costs as an example, like a fundamental way to differentiate and create barriers to competitors over time. And I found when I did that, it provided a very first principles rooted in strategy a way to develop objectives that I could get behind and I felt intrinsically were of value to the business. And it just became helpful for everybody else and allowed them to set real objectives that mattered. I think objectives and OKRs a lot of the time are a framework that people think they need to implement. They become lists of things to do, and they're not driving any real common purpose or driving towards an outcome that is going to yield anything for an early stage or mid-stage, mid-market business.
You've obviously, studied the book Seven Powers, The Foundations of Business Strategy by Hamilton Helmer pretty well. Now, as you transition to AI first companies or, what we are seeing as seed strapping, lean AI companies, however you want to call it, do you think those lessons still apply to all businesses every day still?
I think the moats are the same. I do think that there is an additional kind of nuance to, call it, maybe it's network effects is the right one network effects is the right one to build off of. But I do think that there are data moats now that are available to businesses that are a specific area to focus on, that provide real value because it can't, depending on, I think it's more relevant to bigger companies, bigger businesses, more established, in more established industries. But it's almost, it helps with a network effect, but also in a captured resource or a recorded resource because that data is unique to you. And so I think there are services and ways of operating your business that will inherently have strategic differentiation over time related to data. And it's kind of one of the areas of exploration that I continue to kind of lean into as we start to work with more and more customers and we start to look at where those opportunities are.
Yeah, I think I wasn't playing devil's advocate. I was just asking your opinion. I think the only one that isn't that relevant of the seven. So the seven for listeners are scale economies. So lower per unit cost as production volume increases, creating that barrier to cost advantages like Walmart. Then there's network economies. So like, the value of a service increases as more users join, i.e. Facebook, Meta. The counter positioning, adopting a superior business model that incumbents can't really replace without harming their existing operations. So, Netflix versus Blockbuster kind of thing. Switching cost. This is the one I'm going to pause on. That I don't think actually has as much anymore as it used to because of how easy it is to switch. The Apple ecosystem is holding on dearly to that, but it's becoming more and more less relevant, I think, for some people. And then the other ones are branding, obviously like a Tiffany's, cornered resources like Amazon's leadership team style, and then the processing power. So like production lines, systems of power, things like that. So I think the only one is switching costs that AI is really disrupting the most part. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, how would I think about that? In trying to map that to a real world, environment, you've got an organization that has systems of record that they've got inherent processes, developed towards, whether it's CRM side of the business or, ERP, there are, just pulling those things out and switching to another ERP, I think becomes a real challenge. I think when you think about SaaS and, historical software that's all kind of moved to the cloud and how those businesses think about it, it is evolving. And you can see this in, the AI agent narratives called Salesforce, ServiceNow, where that I think is disintermediating the companies from the underlying systems of record in a way that where you can start to look at individual workflows and start to infuse agentic solutions in ways that decouple you potentially from those solutions or lean in further. But I don't think that switching costs are going to be as powerful as they've been in the past for the SAPs and the Epics and the Oracles of the world. That will take time to play out at the bigger level. But I think the ability for agentic AI to commingle between different technology stacks will reduce that switching cost dramatically.
I think the biggest mistake a lot of AI startups are making is that they think the incumbents are sitting still waiting to be disrupted. And what a lot of the incumbents are doing is they're actually creating internal SWAT teams to disrupt themselves first.
Yep.
And understand how to do it better than the startups will so that they know exactly like what the competition is doing. It's like studying your competitors all the time. The incumbents are not just sitting there. Salesforce, Mark Benioff is not just sitting there waiting to be disrupted by MCP. So I think that's definitely something we can talk about. But let's move on to the AI side. So you have had over 300 conversations with businesses over the last 18 months about AI and all their leadership teams. Tell us a bit about your work at ZeroStone and what are some of the most surprising trends you've noticed in these discussions with leaders?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think the most surprising thing that I noticed throughout those conversations and certainly with the customers that we're dealing with, I think has been the asymmetry between the awareness of AI and it being an imperative to move forward and action towards any kind of meaningful plan. And that seems almost ubiquitous. There's lots of implementations of more Gen AI type solutions, co-pilots, various types that almost seem like toe dipping in the water. But the breadth and scale of the issue and the opportunity to transform your business, I think, has created more of a divide between a real uniform, ubiquitous awareness that AI needs to be part of our business and any kind of like reasonable plan to move there in a way that is going to yield the outcomes that boards are expecting, which is, you're either going to grow our revenue, which is a whole other conversation, or you're going to find, cost reduction in our business so we can operate more efficiently. The potential there is uniformly understood. The pressure is uniform in terms of boards pushing on CEOs and their teams, but they have been stuck at a much earlier stage in the kind of the AI journey than I would have expected.
So tell us about ZeroStone and sort of what is the goal there? Because you're right, like pushing that boulder uphill is hard for leaders and boards are pushing and they don't know which direction to push though, probably. They're just saying, get it going.
Yes.
You decide where you want to push it.
Yes.
What is ZeroStone trying to do in that, in that miscommunication between boards and leaders?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing to note is that there are two transformations that are required in order to progress with AI, and it's most likely one of the major reasons that there's been a barrier. There's a digital transformation, which is non-trivial in terms of how complex it is and the resources available. So AI and then the underlying data infrastructure required to support AI and agentic AI at scale. And then the human capital transformation that is required within an organization. The real P&L impact happens a lot of the time when new roles are created and old ones kind of go away. And you've started at first principles and remapped a workflow within an organization along a value stream that has a combination of AI agents and humans. And so that resulting end state requires certain roles to go away and new ones to be created. And so there's a big technical journey there and a lot of complexity on the various elements of AI and data. So that the change management within the organization is a significant transformation, both technically and from a people perspective. And so what we're helping them do and where we've evolved our business is not only develop the advisory capabilities around that, but it is so tightly coupled with the development and management of agentic solutions that I've expanded, the organization from purely advisory to 12 months ago, actually, having teams and partners that can deliver, front edge, like leading edge agentic solutions. And so much so that I, recently brought on a CTO who thinks about these things from a first principles perspective. So PhD in neuroscience, understands the models really at the LLMs and AI models at a first principles level, and in his role at Canadian Tire, pushed the boundaries of what was achievable from agentic AI within the organization, so that we could not only offer full advisory capabilities, but allow them to actually build and test and manage these agentic solutions. What I experienced in that progression is that the underlying, technical ecosystem from, the hyperscalers through to the partners that kind of sat on top of them, are the tools exist within the hyperscalers. Think about the Google stack or the Microsoft stack, even Cohere now. All of the full stack of data and AI capabilities are there, but the ability to actually advise and then develop solutions within the organization, within the context of an organization, just didn't exist. And so we've expanded our capabilities to do that, and that's how we engage in industry, and focus really on mid market, where we found that maximum pressure, similar pressure to enterprise. So we define mid market as like 50 million to 500 million in revenue. So all of the same pressures that big enterprise have, with none of the capabilities from an AI and a data science perspective. And so they really do need the help. And it's been super rewarding work.
Yeah, but just, picking on a couple of things you mentioned about the things that leaders are facing, internal tech teams are facing, and then the regular just employees that are going through the change management. It's really hard because as a leader, you're not going to see a lot of mid-market leaders act like Toby, ruthless in the way in which you have to make a reason why you're not adopting AI before demanding more resources to go hire more people. But then as a buy or build mentality, everyone internally is trying to justify their own existence before being replaced by AI. So you don't get the buy-in politically. So you almost have to be a benevolent dictator as a leader in a company to find a way to win in this new age of building businesses. So how are you helping people develop that changing mentality of being a dictator without going through, the kind of buy and build journey first, and helping them find those quick wins early?
That's a great example. So there's a couple of pieces there. There's how do we set the organization up to, go on this journey, and then how do we get quick wins to show people what's there. And so on the journey, it comes back to, again, first principles and setting your culture up and being very, very clear that our culture is one of growth. Our culture is one of learning, and one where we're all going to have to evolve, because AI is going to require that. And so it starts with the CEO. Culture is what we do every day. It isn't something that's written down somewhere. And so we start with the CEO to say, understand the difference between AI and agentic AI, and understand that you're going to have a lot to learn here, and set the tone. And then once you've established a culture of learning, you start to move forward with, a value map of where AI, is applicable in the business, and an understanding that, and once we start to see quick wins, so we implement a quick win, and there is disruption in that quick win. There are people's roles that, are no longer required because agentic AI is doing that work right now. And there are new roles that exist that require oversight of digital workers and new skill sets. And in order to progress from, the previous roles to these new ones, you're going to have to learn, you're going to have to grow. And what we found this is still early days in terms of agentic AI becoming pervasive. What we found in early days is not everyone wants to sign up for that. And so in a culture where you can avoid being a benevolent dictator or just a dictator, to say, quite honestly, we are all going to have to learn and grow here, myself included as a CEO. There are new things to learn. This is a new paradigm, and it's happening faster than any other paradigm shift in the history of humanity. So we all need to be willing to learn and grow. And as you start to implement that culture, it becomes true. And it just so happens that not everyone's willing to get on that bus. And so what ends up happening is that you get self-selection. And this is a new trend we're kind of seeing in the last 3 months, is you get self-selection of people that say, I'm too uncomfortable with that. And so I'm going to leave and go to some other place. Or if I'm at the edge of retirement, I'm just going to retire. And so it ends up being an honest reflection of what's required in your business, and sets you up to, and then the resulting culture is one of people that want to learn and grow. And, the early stages here in this development in the market, what a fun place to be.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's the biggest paradigm shift we have, both from a societal point of view, economic point of view, but also a job placement point of view, because you just said it yourselves. You've got like these maybe older generation hanger-oners, right, who aren't ready to hang it up. Not that they should, just saying that they don't want to. And then all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, hey, by the way, you got to start using this stuff or else we're going to replace you or move you into a different division. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to hang it up myself then at that point. All of a sudden there's now a potential opening for somebody in their early 20s to take on a role like that, and, all of a sudden be empowered to take on more responsibility, which is great. and also be excited to learn technology at a different level than they had before. So there's that positive benefit. But then on the other hand, you've got this article that you retweeted about MIT saying that only 5% of generative AI projects are delivering measurable P&L impacts. So how are you kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth with leaders saying, on one hand, you got to take this seriously. On the other hand, it's not actually maybe having that much of a measurable impact, but you still got to take it seriously?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And look, it speaks to the heart of understanding what AI is and what it isn't. And, generative AI solutions versus agentic AI solutions are fundamentally different things. And those failed pilots are Gen AI solutions. These are, models that are helping individuals get more efficient versus using models as the reasoning engine or a brain of an AI agent that does work on someone's behalf. And so when I start with leaders, it's understanding the fundamental difference between generative AI, which is what these pilots are and failed, because they're not driving P&L impact. Because if you have a bunch of individuals that are 30% more efficient, it doesn't fix a process or change the fundamental way that you're actually achieving and doing work. And so when I go to organizations, we start there. Here's the difference between AI and generative AI and what the capabilities are. And then it starts the conversation. This is not trivial stuff to understand, but it can be broken down pretty easily. And as soon as CEOs get on board and understand the difference between those things, then we actually have a conversation to move forward. And the other part of it that I found is helpful when you get to that point with CEOs and their teams is that, and this helps with the change management, is that you don't have to become a completely agentic, autonomous organization overnight. In fact, that's impossible to do, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. But what you can do is pick one use case that's easy to understand, implement that one, understand what's possible, understand the change management elements of that project, then do another one, and then do another one. I think the other thing I like try and instill in leaders and their teams is this is a 3-year journey, and no one in your industry is going to go any faster than you are if you can implement AI at scale, agentic AI at scale in 3 years. And so understanding the difference between those two things, that they are going to have P&L impact. You are going to displace people. You are going to have an opportunity to move them. Some people will get off the bus. And this is a progression that can take 2, 3, 5 years, really starts to frame the opportunity and gets them moving into, actual AI implementations that make a difference versus generative solutions that are nice tools and are probably helpful in various areas, but aren't translating to real value for shareholders.
Give us some examples of quick wins, maybe in certain use cases. We heard Mark Benioff say that there was 100 million plus calls that they never were able to call back customers or potential leads because they just didn't have enough SDRs to fill those calls. And so now they've got agentic, call agents, SDRs, that are making those calls now to those 100 million plus leads, which is hilarious to hear a CEO say that. We had so much demand or potential leads coming in that we couldn't even physically call back. Are those couple examples you're thinking about?
Let me start by saying I'm a massive fan of Mark Benioff. I think he's playing 4-dimensional chess in a game where most people are playing checkers. The current level of the technology to have outbound AI SDRs, in my opinion, isn't quite there yet. Humans are so adapted. Having a human experience with who they're talking to, they're just not there yet. What I would say is that on the other end of that, just keeping Salesforce in view, they've taken 4,000 inbound call agents in their customer care center from 9,000 to 5,000 in the news, and reduce that headcount. I think some of those folks have actually made their way in other places in the organization, but that use case is a very straightforward one because it just so turns out that agentic capabilities can map to an AI to an agent in very kind of one-to-one map fashion. So email, voice, omni-channel kind of interaction with an inbound request for customer service can be handled by an agent or a small, multi-agentic system.
Agreed.
Obvious opportunity there. And I guess the other one that just comes to mind, we're doing a lot of work in retail. And so inbound voice on basically order taking. Think about, food as an example, where you've got your menu and you're ordering from a menu, or you got an app, but you can just call in and have a voice, resource agent basically talk you through your process. If someone knocks on the door or your dog barks, they're not going to get disrupted. It's all very natural, and the experience is very human. Is an obvious one that is creating customer service wins. Reducing breakage on carts of people that try to order food and that don't.
Sure.
So that's another obvious one for me.
Yeah, but the problem that we've also seen in our company is that a lot of these AI pilots are working. Technically, they're succeeding as a pilot, but they often fail at the scaling part of it. How are you thinking about helping companies navigate beyond a pilot to demonstrate real value on a recurring basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I would, in your portfolio companies, I would see it as a different problem, but we're seeing failed pilots that are, in our view, real agentic pilots. So they've gotten to the point where they understand what an agent is. They've either bought one off the shelf and implemented it, or have built their own. What often happens is in almost all cases, they've built a sandbox. And, that sandbox is small in nature, and they're proving out the capabilities of this agent in terms of its ability to conduct an entire workflow. Now, to scale that, you now have to tackle your data issue. And so in order to provide, in order to scale an agentic solution, you have to pull in all the data that agent needs to do its job. If it's replacing a human, it's going to have to access disparate, often siloed data within the architecture of the company. And so we end up bringing that into one place, ingesting all of that data, or the data required for that agentic solution, into one place, and then performing the various layers of enrichment, lineage, accessibility, so that only the right people and agents can access the right information, and information security, so that you're optimizing and making it secure for agents to work at scale. And so that's where we've seen it in the mid-market. I think earlier stage businesses have, I'm very excited for earlier stage businesses because they have less, kind of historic data, and they have their risk profile is so much lower in terms of their abilities to accelerate with agentic solutions. And I think it's the reason you're seeing some of these, early stage companies like get to $1 million, $2 million in ARR like very quickly, because they don't have the risk profile and the data challenges that 50 or 100-year-old businesses have, and so they can implement agentic solutions just as they are building new processes. And instead of hiring a person, they're popping an agent in there. From a portfolio company perspective, in your world, the companies that you deal with and do such a great job with, it would be such a fun place to be.
I agree.
Startup.
I think it's the scaling part that everybody's still concerned about, like the renewal cycles. I think that messy data is still a problem. I think like getting it into the data lake is obviously fine, but then having it actually report back out and be, agentic for you to interact with it on different levels is still being done manually in the back end.
Yeah.
That is happening.
The underlying data infrastructure and data science, and how you optimize structured and unstructured data for agentic AI at scale. The tools exist. The product and engineering from Google and others is there, but having the capabilities to actually do that and have implemented it at scale, just we're early in that cycle. I think for most organizations to have done that. It's one of the reasons that I think Salesforce does such a good job, is that their product, the data cloud product, and some of the acquisitions they made with MuleSoft and Informatica really support that entire process. And
we'll look at the government contracts they've been winning.
Yeah.
All these massive US, VA affairs contracts and stuff. What advice would you have, James, for, a first-time founder going into, a mid-market enterprise sale type conversation, and it's still getting stuck at the buy versus build 1 yard line? And how would they get it through? Obviously, you would suggest that they read your book, that you recommend everybody read, obviously, the Foundations of Business Strategy. But what other things would you recommend?
So let's frame this up. This is an early stage, call it AI first business, where So there's two things that I in kind of helping founders like deal with being stuck. And that are two major things that I noticed over time. One was just, it's less about getting stuck at the 1 yard line, but repeatability of process and focusing on outcomes versus activity. So to scale, your revenue, so getting stalled from a revenue perspective, pervasive across the organization, it's really understanding what your sales process is and understanding what the activities are, and then mapping people to that so that you can scale that piece up. What I found later, this is probably more, relevant to your question, you kind of call it Series B, Series C companies, is that there's almost always at that stage a divergence between go-to-market and product. And so, one of the things that I've always done evolved from a strategy perspective is anchor go-to-market and product drivers to your moats so that you have a unified thinking about where you're headed. And so when salespeople are in front of, customers, product is aligned with them fully in terms of what's available and what's not. And they are going to market together versus, the growing, kind of divergence between those two things where product is over here in its own world and your sales and marketing team are over here in its own world. And the gap is causing, real friction in sales cycles because you're selling on roadmap a lot of the time. And you have trouble hitting that next S curve and really kind of scaling your business.
What startup isn't selling on future roadmap expectations? Come on, James. Come on.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And look, this isn't the Anthony Lagavera podcast, but I've mentioned him enough. But yeah, he pushed that early, like sell it and they will come, is just part of the DNA of any good founder.
It's a tough one to thread the line on, though. But I hear you, especially in AI, when things are moving so fast, you almost have to just to stay in the game. But you better deliver consistently on it.
I also think that product cycles, I mean, if there was a time to do it, now is it, right? If you can sell a gap, the product cycles are so short. I mean, you get a decent technical founder who can vibe code his way to at least a proof of concept that can then be built. Those cycles can be a lot shorter than they have been historically.
Yes, from 0 to 1, for sure you can do that, but I don't think from 1 to 10 you can do that as much. So we'll save that for another chat. Before we wrap things up, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites. So first off, your favorite podcast.
Yeah, I got two, I guess. Moonshots I love lately. I mean, they're really on the front edge of kind of latest in AI, and then in the conversations around models and where it's going, and then how to infuse that into business. So I found it formative. And then call it a 8 or 9 year favorite for me is just the Waking Up podcast from Sam Harris. I feel like he has a worldview that is as informed as anybody in human history, approaches conversations like very truthfully, and I end up learning a lot about, the world and how to think about being a present human being.
Yeah, I saw him speak live once. It was fascinating. Next is your favorite newsletter or blog?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't have one right now. I think I have trouble in a generative AI era. I mean, there's so much AI slop out there that I have a lot of trouble finding consistent, well-written, content that I can't consume over a podcast. So yeah, I don't have one right now, if I'm honest. I have a few podcasts, and that's how I've kind of decided to consume, educate myself and consume the content I want.
Fair enough. Favorite tech gadget?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few. I'm a recent call it Android convert. So I've got the new Z Fold phone with the watch, and I'm finding it to be an amazing experience. It was Apple from iPhone 4 to iPhone 15.
So the switching cost wasn't there for you either.
No, they figured that out. It was a painful day, but that was it.
What was the most painful part?
Like it's just having switched iPhones, and it's just instant on there. Like there was some things you had passwords and re-downloading of apps and there was to get it exactly the way that I wanted.
One day.
It was maybe one day in between a bunch of other things. I'd also say that the Meta glasses have been amazing. So I got my prescription in them and I used them for.
I found them too tight on my head, to be honest with you. I didn't find them as comfortable. I got too big of a head, maybe. All right. Next is your favorite new trend.
Favorite new trend. Yeah, I don't know what the new I don't know what the new trend is. I don't have a new trend, if I'm honest. I think
an old trend.
Old trend. Yeah. Not a
bell-bottom jeans.
Yeah, my wife would laugh at this because I'm very boring from a fashion perspective. I wear hoodies most of the time, unless I got to be in an office. So yeah, let me think about trend. We'll come back to that one.
No worries. Next is your favorite book?
I would say Gun, Germs, and Steel.
Still a classic.
My favorite one.
You read it often?
I've reread it probably 2 or 3 times, I would say. I first read it probably a year after it came out. It's the most informative book, in my opinion, to understand where humans came from, how we ended up in the current, call it,
right,
geopolitical state that we're in terms of strength and weaknesses of various regions of the world. And it's like, oh, that's how that happened. And it's, yeah, there's really helpful lessons in there that I come back to once in a while.
Absolutely. Pretty relevant these days. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
Favorite life lesson. Look, this is a recent one, but I think what I've learned is, this is relevant to founders, I think, probably as well. If you don't live up to your potential, life is hard, and you're gonna experience a lot of pain, emotionally and in a bunch of other ways. And so, I'm not a woo-woo person, but I think our being in the universe is to expand and do as much as we possibly can. And if we don't, we're going to suffer. I certainly have in the past. Knowing what that is and knowing what you're capable of, I think, is part of what it means it's part of the human experience. But it's living up to your potential and being honest about what you can do, and pushing as hard as you can every day to realize your opportunities.
Yeah, to spin it back around, it's like knowing what you don't know you're doing to know what you're doing, basically, is what you should probably do, right? Like being aware that you don't know what you're doing something is probably the best way to figure out how to get better and succeed at doing it.
Yeah, I think landing in discomfort and living in discomfort is an indication that you're doing the right thing. And so, kind of keep going.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thanks for joining the tank today with James Baskin, founder and CEO of ZeroStone.
Thanks, Matt. Great to talk to you, Matt.